This week, I'm doing something different. I played a game that was technically released to the US years after the original Japanese release, but I'm not playing that version. I'm playing the original version of Tales of Phantasia that was released on the Super Famicom, although I used a reproduction cartridge that contained a well-done fan translation to actually play the game. And I have to say, I had one hell of an enjoyable experience playing this lengthy RPG. The star of Tales of Phantasia is Kless, a young man learning how to be a swordsman from his father Miguel. Him and a good friend, the archer Chester, leave town to enter a nearby forest to hunt boars, when they approach a massive tree that has seen better days. A spirit emerges from the tree, begging Kless to protect it. Then they slay the boar before hearing the town's alarm bells ringing. Rushing home, they find a devastating scene. The entire village's population had been massacred, with the homes in fiery ruins. Kless vows to find the being responsible, and Chester remains behind to bury the townsfolk. Kless heads to his uncle's house in a town called Euclid, where he is betrayed and captured by guards. He meets a healer named Mint, and after reuniting with Chester, gets into a situation where he's face to face with an evil warrior named Douse. At least, I think that's how you pronounce it. I could be wrong. The group is horribly underpowered, and an acquaintance of Kless sends him and Mint back in time to stop Douse before he gained all of his strength. Kless and Mint eventually meet up with a summoner named Clarth and a half-elf mage named Arch before really setting off on their epic journey to take down the evil guy. In typical RPG fashion, that recap that I just gave you takes place over the first 6 or so hours of the game. There's a lot of other small characters that you'll meet, along with extra tasks that you can partake in if you really want to, like playing matchmaker to a young couple. The world is fun to explore, with lots of areas that would be highly beneficial to visit to learn more skills for your characters, which I'll get to shortly. But first, at the core of most RPGs, along with the story, is the combat. Tales of Phantasia has a very unique combat system in that it's essentially a 2D brawler with RPG elements. It may or may not come as a surprise that it works out really well. It actually reminds me of the combat in the Famicom game Armed Dragon Fantasy Vilgust, if you've watched my review for that. Anyway, for the most part, you only control Kless in combat. How it works is that when entering an encounter, you are given a flat 2D plane with your characters and enemies facing each other. Pressing the D-pad moves Kless along this line, with the other party members following him. Pressing the A button makes Kless slash his sword, while B is relegated to his skills. But this isn't all. By altering your button presses, and depending on the distance to the targeted foe, Kless may change up his attack type. For example, just pressing A causes him to do a normal slash with his weapon, while holding up and A throws a slower stab that has a bit more range than the slash. If you are at what the game considers long range, double tapping A has Kless jump in the air for a leaping slash. At what I would call medium range, double tapping A has him do a jumping rising uppercut-like attack, excellent for flying enemies. Range also plays a part in what skills Kless uses. In the skill menu, you can assign a total of 4 skills that Kless had learned, 2 for short range and 2 for long range. These are used by pressing either B or up and B to determine which skill at that distance you want him to use. Some of these skills can be game changers in battle. But again, you aren't alone, as you will typically be running around with 3 other party members that will assist you in battle. These are optionally controlled by you or the AI, depending on what tactics you assign to them. For the most part, you assign each friend the tactics of go all out, use a few skills here and there, don't use a lot of abilities, or don't do anything at all other than melee strikes. Normally, I kept my party members on the conserve TP, or tech points tactic, as they still help out but don't drain their magic pools in 1 or 2 battles. However, as long as they aren't actively charging a spell, you can press a button to bring up a menu and instruct them to cast a specific skill manually. Thankfully, the AI does a great job at avoiding attacks that would heal opponents, such as casting a water elemental against a tree foe. It's not perfect, but there were hardly any times where I had problems. And even if you do enter a dungeon in which your pals are casting dumb skills, you can go into their skill menus and temporarily disable auto casting of those spells unless you tell them otherwise. Overall, the combat system is surprisingly in-depth and gives a lot of options on how you want the other 3 heroes to act. But since Kless is the main character, and the one you'll be primarily controlling, who'll be the guy you're focusing on keeping alive. As you use skills in battle, you may notice that some of them have a mastery percentage. Once this reaches 100%, Kless is considered an expert with that skill. It doesn't improve the stats for it at all, but what it does do is allow Kless to use certain more advanced techniques. For example, if he masters both the Blade Storm and Phoenix abilities, he can then use a combo that flies him towards an enemy in a fire-based attack before immediately launching into a Blade Storm. I didn't use these combos very often, but I can definitely see their usefulness. Normally in RPGs, I try to save my skill casting for boss battles to save MP, but it's not really the case here. After every successful battle, Kless and crew regain a small amount of TP. The more you level up, the more TP you regenerate, so don't feel bad about using the more advanced TP heavy techniques. Also, I should mention that although Kless, along with Arch, learn skills as they level up, they can also purchase techniques from NPCs in the world. This is why you should explore the land, looking for any kind of small camps. Some of these NPCs are very well hidden, so look everywhere. With all of these skills, combat can get pretty hectic. Many skills will pause the action while it's showing the attack animation, but some skills continue in real time. Also, attacking or taking damage can nullify a casting of a skill, so if you are running into a problematic magic casting enemy, you may want to keep up the pressure on them to prevent them from throwing magic your way. Also, as a side note, I found it interesting that although Kless does use swords, his other primary weapon are halberds. I can't think of any other RPG in which the main character opts for the bulkier polearm over a shiny, sharp sword. But due to the way the combat works, with the slashes and stabs that Kless attacks with, the halberd is an excellent tool for him. Another unique mechanic is the food bag. Kless can win food from battles or purchase it in certain shops. By using this food, it puts it into a food bag. As long as there are sustenance in the bag, the party will regain HP as they are walking around the map, allowing Mint to save her TP for more critical situations. I'll be honest, as cool as this is, I never really found much use for it, usually allowing my food to just remain in the inventory forgotten. However, if this is something that you'd want to use when playing it yourself, it's definitely beneficial. Speaking of the inventory, it's actually one of the few gripes about the game that I have. Not really the screen itself, as I wish every game had the filter options that Tales has. You can sort the items based on when it was acquired, type, name, and so on. But no, my complaint is how many of each item you can carry. I get not being able to carry 400 swords, as this really wouldn't be needed. Instead, every item, including healing items, are limited to 15 units per item. Worse, you cannot drop anything you don't want, instead being forced to find a shop to sell them to. This is only really a problem with accessories, as I had 15 heavy stones, which are used to prevent damage from the highly destructive tractor beam spell you run into. But when I wanted to swap the accessory out with something more useful, I was told I was out of room. At first, I was confused. You have 160 inventory slots, and I was well below that. But what the game meant was that I had 15 heavy stones, and by unequipping the one Clarth had, it would go over that limit to 16. So I literally could not exchange it out until backtracking to a shop, selling a ton of the stupid things, go under the limit, and then finally be able to swap it. Adding on to that, having only 15 of medicines kinda sucks. For the gummies, the game's typical HP and TP regaining items, it wasn't that big of a deal. But only carrying 15 remedy potions in an area where enemies enjoy stunning and petrifying you is a nightmare. Mint doesn't get a skill to heal this till about level 43, which I had reached about 15 to 16 hours into the game. Even if they wanted to keep the limit 15, having the ability to maybe place different stacks of items, like say a second or third 15, would have helped. But due to the existing design, let's just say I started getting a little bit nervous when I was down to about 3 remedy potions and I got into a battle where I was ambushed by lizardmen, who have a very high chance of petrification if they strike you. If you haven't noticed by now, the graphics of the game might be some of the best that SNES, okay, SFC, had to offer. All of the characters had some excellent detail to them, with exaggerated animations when they are hit with a particularly nasty attack. The magical attacks are hit or miss, but this was something that we saw in pretty much every RPG for the time. For example, for as much as I absolutely love Chrono Trigger, I always thought Chrono's Luminaire looked pretty lame for it being his ultimate ability. Anyway, it's not just the characters that look good. The world map uses mode 7 as expected, but it looks fantastic. Towns are believable, with plenty of characters running around, smoke leaking from chimneys, fountains spraying water, and so on. There's even a town in a desert that has a heat wave effect. Even better, when you walk around in dungeons, you'll see random critters going about their lives. Lizards crawl around, fish jump out of the water, bats flutter. To top it all off, there are water reflections whenever Kless gets close to the water. This blew my mind. The developers really took their time to ensure that Tales of Phantasia contained a world that felt fully alive. For as great as the graphics are, the music might be even better. It's seriously as good as the best that Squaresoft and Enix was able to put out for that era. The battle theme pumps up the adrenaline, but then when you reach the first boss, holy crap, it's an epic track that really puts you on edge. I'll admit, I suck at explaining how good music is, but take my word for it. Go onto YouTube and look up the OST. Seriously, I won't even be upset if you stop watching this video right now to go listen to it. It's worth it if you enjoy video game music. There's only really one thing left to mention, the fan translation. Overall, it's a great, competent job, but I will admit that I can assume that some liberties were made. I'm sure that Arch didn't get necessarily all horny over Kless on a boat ride like it was shown here. Granted, I'm sure there was a slightly more mature thing going on here to show Arch's crush on Kless, but I can only imagine that the original, untranslated game was a bit more reserved. But then again, I could be wrong. It's not like I can play the original game to find out since I don't know Japanese. It should go without saying that Tales of Phantasia is one of the absolute best RPGs of the time. I am really glad that I picked up the repro cart, and although I pushed this review back a few weeks to give it more time, I still haven't finished it, with me being about 20 hours in. Even so, Tales is a game that all RPG fans, especially 16-bit RPG fans, should experience. A compelling story, engaging in unique combat mechanics, challenging bosses, and a beautiful world all come together with a soundtrack that complements the game perfectly. I really can't recommend it enough. You can get the GBA version for about $45, or you can do what I did and get a reproduction card to play it on an SNES. No matter how you get yourself a copy, I highly recommend that you do. Final score, 7 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.